Welcome to Yahoo Finance Sports Report, a unique look at the business of sports, brought to you by Yahoo Finance and Yahoo Sports. I'm your host, Joe Pompliano, and I'm here to coach you through the financial game. We'll look beyond the headlines, analyze all the latest sports news, the teams, trades, and billion-dollar deals, so you and your portfolio will win big. This week, we are taking a look at the UFC's next media rights deal, the launch of DraftKings' new subscription service, the economics behind this year's college football playoff national championship game, and the launch of Unrivaled, a new 3-on-3 women's basketball league. I'll also be joined by Yahoo Sports senior reporter Vince Goodwill to discuss all things NBA. Let's huddle up and get right into it. All right, it's time for this week's Pomps Playbook, where I take a look at some of the biggest headlines in sports that you and your portfolio need to know. Let's start by talking about the UFC. According to Bloomberg, the UFC is seeking more than $1 billion per year for its next media rights deal. The UFC is currently paid $450 million per year by ESPN for its two media rights deals today, one for its regular events and another for its pay-per-view events on ESPN+. The UFC's deal with ESPN ends in 2025, but the two parties are about to enter an exclusive Q1 negotiating window at the end of January that concludes in mid-April. While the UFC has indicated that it would like to remain with ESPN, UFC's owner, TKO Group Holdings, has openly discussed moving to a multi-network model to boost revenue, similar to what you would find in the NFL and NBA. Bloomberg also reported that the UFC has multiple interested parties for its coming media rights deal, including Amazon, Netflix, Warner Bros. Discovery, and YouTube. Netflix is a party to watch, considering that the WWE, which is also owned by TKO, signed a 10-year, $5 billion deal with the streaming company to carry Monday Night Raw. And premium live events like the UFC fit perfectly into Netflix's live sports strategy. Personally, I'd keep an eye out for UFC Netflix deal featuring an annual event at the Las Vegas Sphere. But in the end, I believe that UFC will ultimately split up its media rights package to bring on more partners. ESPN will look to keep the UFC on board to help launch its new flagship streaming service, slated for a fall 2025 release. But don't be surprised to see a new partner enter the fold by the time this deal is signed, especially with the UFC currently being one of the only major sports properties up for media rights renewal. That could further boost TKO stock, which is up more than 85% in the past year. Next up, let's talk about the Philadelphia 76ers reversing course again. After covering the deal on our December 26th episode about the Philadelphia 76ers plan to build a new arena in Center City, the Sixers have switched up their arena plans again. Ernest Owens of Philadelphia Magazine first broke the news that the Sixers are scrapping their Center City plan to sign a deal with Comcast to build a new arena in South Philadelphia Sports Complex, where the team currently plays in the Comcast-owned Wells Fargo Center. The new arena will be a 50-50 partnership between the 76ers, which are owned by Josh Harris and David Blitzer of Harris Blitzer Sports Entertainment, and Comcast Spectator of the NHL's Philadelphia Flyers. The venue will be home to both the 76ers and the Flyers, and will stay in the same stadium district that is home to the Philadelphia Eagles and the Philadelphia Phillies. As part of the stadium deal, Comcast will purchase a minority stake in the 76ers, partner with the team to bring a WNBA expansion team to Philadelphia, and also get media rights renewal deals to the new arena. The interesting part here is that this deal has always been on the table from Comcast, as the Sixers spent the better part of 2 years pursuing a potential downtown arena. The Sixers also looked at building a new arena in New Jersey, but this move represents a stark reversal from the Sixers, as the team has secured approval from Philadelphia City Council less than 4 weeks ago to build a privately funded $1.5 billion arena in Center City. But as we covered before, the Sixers proposal for the new arena and a surrounding mixed-use development had stiff opposition from locals for fears of gentrification, increased area rents, and traffic gridlock. Lastly, I want to talk about DraftKings' new subscription product called DraftKings Sportsbook Plus. Ahead of the NFL playoff, DraftKings announced the test launch of a new subscription service called DraftKings Sportsbook Plus in New York to select eligible customers in the state. Now, no criteria was given on how select customers will qualify, but the $20 per month subscription will provide subscribers boosted odds, essentially better odds on select parlays. The boosted odds will only be applied to parlays with individual legs that are minus 500 or shorter, including same-game parlays. The odds boost will look like this. Parlays with 2 legs will see profits go up by 10%, with boosts going up as more legs are added. Parlays with 11 or more legs will see profits double or go up 100%. DraftKings is most likely doing this because parlays are the highest margin bets for sportsbooks, given the unlikely odds they present. But they are also a popular bet among sports bettors for their massive payouts. Odds boosts are typically used as a marketing tool to bring in new betting customers, but the offering of unlimited boosts as a subscription is a rare offering in the U.S. sports betting market. In fact, DraftKings is the first major sportsbook to offer this kind of subscription model in the U.S., so it'll be interesting to 1, see if other sportsbooks try it, and 2, how it impacts DraftKings stock, which is up 21% over the last year. This week for the Deeper Dive, where I give you a play-by-play analysis of news in the sports world and its significance to your bottom line, we're talking about next week's College Football Playoff National Championship game. The College Football Playoff National Championship game takes place next Monday between the 7th seed Notre Dame and 8th seed Ohio State. And college football's biggest game is a massive money engine. The game features 2 schools with the biggest budgets in college football. Notre Dame at number 2 with a $72 million budget, and Ohio State at number 1 with a $72.5 million budget. Both Notre Dame and Ohio State have earned $20 million in college football playoff payouts for reaching the championship game. That's $4 million for qualifying in the tournament, $4 million for making it to the quarterfinals, $6 million for making it to the semifinals, and another $6 million for making it to the championship game. However, Notre Dame is the only school that gets to keep all of this money for themselves, as Ohio State has to share that money with everyone else in their conference. So again, Notre Dame gets all $20 million to themselves, while Ohio State shares that money with every other school in the Big Ten, meaning they're only going to be taking home about $2 to $2.5 million out of that $20 million that they earn. But don't get too comfortable with the payout structure, because it's all going to change in 2026 due to the College Football Playoff's new 6-year, $7.8 billion extension with ESPN. This means the College Football Playoff and participating conferences will benefit from the $1.3 billion annual TV payments from ESPN contract, starting in 2026. That's a massive jump from the current deal, which pays $470 million annually. This 176% increase mostly accounts for the increased package of games, because the College Football Playoff essentially went from having 3 playoff games with 4 teams to 11 games with 12 teams. The ESPN contract was also drawn up to account for a 14-team field if the College Football Playoff expanded again in the future, but ESPN will not pay any money for additional inventory if that expansion happens. But here's how the payouts will look when that new contract kicks out in 2026. Each SEC school, regardless of whether you make the tournament or not, will be given $21 million. The Big Ten is right there with them with $21 million each. The ACC is next at $13 million. Notre Dame, as an independent, is at 12, right along with the Big 12. And the group of 5 schools will each receive $1.8 million each. Now, the caveat to all of this is that Notre Dame's participation bonuses will go away based on their performance, but they can get a $6 million fee for making the tournament. So their $12 million fee each year will be awarded up to $18 million if they actually make the playoff. But those $20 million fees will no longer exist. So the economics for a school like Notre Dame will change drastically when the new TV deal kicks in 2026. But as for this year's game, it's at Mercedes-Benz Stadium in Atlanta. Tickets aren't going to be cheap, with the average price on Vivid Seats going for $2,300 and the lowest ticket available on Ticketmaster at $1,500. Hotels are actually in a decent spot because the game is Atlanta. You can get in for around $200 a night right now. However, all the flights essentially into Atlanta the day before and the day after are sold out. And Mercedes-Benz has become one of the preeminent stadiums in America today. It's easily accessible via public transportation. It's owned by the state itself, but run by Arthur Blank's company, who owns the Atlanta Falcons. And they're hosting a ton of events, both recently, but also into the future. Football alone, they've hosted the SEC Championship, the Peach Bowl, and now the College Football Playoff National Championship game, all in the span of just 5 weeks. We've made it to the one-on-one, a conversation where I get to break down news and sports with a key player in the industry. This week, I'm joined by Yahoo Sports senior reporter Vince Goodwill. Vince, thanks so much for joining the show. I'd love to just talk about the NBA as a product at first. There's been a lot of discussion around NBA ratings over the last several weeks, and they've certainly come back to life since Christmas Day. But I would love to just get your opinion on just where the NBA stands as a product today.
I think if you're talking about ratings and you're talking about the game, Joe, I think those are 2 different discussions. But if you're talking about the ratings itself, it's important to note that compared to the NFL, everyone is going to fall short. It is the perfect television product in terms of how we consume media in our very, short attention span. The NBA requires a lot more in and out and a lot more dedication from the common fan. I think when you put on good games, as you saw on Christmas Day, when you have some of the name brands and you have some of the superstars that America has come to understand is bankable, I think the people will come. I think even last week or the week before, when you had 2 teams that are not necessarily household names at this point, Oklahoma City and Cleveland, they put on one of the best games the NBA has had, and the numbers reflected it even though they don't have the LeBrons, the Stephen Currys, the Kevin Durants. As those players are aging out, the NBA has to figure out a way to market the new generation of players and figure out, Joe, how to market them to a newer generation of fan that it isn't watching television and linear media as much. You have to find these fans where they are and market directly more to them.
Yeah, and it feels like some of that stuff will happen, right? The NBA has new media partners starting next year where they're already producing some new ads with some new members of that superstar class. So that's one part of it. The other part of it seems to be that there's just this divide between broadcast and cable television, right? If you think about the games on Christmas Day, the numbers were up tremendously, mostly because they placed the games on ABC. So it felt like there was this hysteria when it could have easily been fixed with just doing that, which they did. And I think the TV partners are relatively happy. But one thing that came out of that debate was everyone seemed to have an opinion on how to fix the product itself, right? Whether it was there's too much three-point shooting, we need more fouls or something like that. Were there anything that you heard during that discussion or debate that you think was a good idea and the NBA should look to implement?
I mean, some things I've suggested because I've been a critic in some ways of how the game has evolved. I think there's two different schools of thought here. There are some people who want the game to stay in the Stone Age to sort of preserve history in the way that we know it, preserve history in the way that you grew up watching basketball and the connection to it. I don't think it necessarily has to be this way. I think NBA fans and sports fans in general, while they like seeing offense and more offense and spectacular plays, they also like to understand that there's a difficulty in it, that you're watching spectacular because it's going against really good defense and not because the sliders are so tilted towards offense that it looks artificial. And it looks like the league is sort of legislating defense out of the game. I think that's where the balance is when you're talking about more fouls. Do fans want to see the Stone Age of the NBA in 2005, where you had the Detroit Pistons and San Antonio Spurs playing 80 to 74 games? No, that is not what the fans want to see. The skills from the players have gotten a lot better and the rules have reflected that. But I think at some point, the rules have tilted a little too much toward that space to the point that the European game is a lot more physical than the NBA game. And that has never been the case. So I think with the NBA, as they've done before, as they did last year, when they allowed more physicality in certain spots on the floor, scoring was brought down a little bit and fans responded to that because they felt like the numbers weren't artificially driven up by the league or by the league's rules. I think they're forever tinkering with it. I just think sometimes you have to cut through the noise of the conversation and figuring out, okay, is this just old guys talking or is this really something substantive that the league should be paying attention to?
All right, we've got to take a quick break, but we'll be right back with Vince Goodwill right after this. Welcome back to Yahoo Finance Sports Report. I'm your host, Joe Pompliano. I'm here with Yahoo Sports senior reporter, Vince Goodwill. One of the things we've seen over the last few years, specifically with the NFL, which we mentioned earlier, is a lot of these media properties are trying to create these one-off special events, right? The NFL has a Black Friday game now, they have Christmas Day games, and the NBA has certainly tried to do this as well, with the NBA Cup being a midseason tournament. But we're a couple of years into this now. What is your general feeling on how well it has gone so far and the fan reaction to it?
Well, I think one of the biggest things is that it's in Las Vegas. So it's going to be very difficult on a whim when some games are decided 2 days before you're supposed to be in Las Vegas to ask a fan base or a large segment of a fan base, like in the case of Milwaukee Bucks, they have to fly 2 time zones in the span of a day, get hotel rooms in Las Vegas to create a real home court advantage compared to in year one of that. You had the Los Angeles Lakers there, and that's literally a 4-hour drive for LA fans who have no problem going to Vegas for a weekend anyway. So I think you have to ask yourself, is Las Vegas the most viable place for the NBA Cup moving forward, given the logistics of it? I think it was a pretty decent atmosphere given all things, and you want to incentivize your players to be able to have a couple of days in Las Vegas in between the games so that they feel like, in addition to the cash prize, in addition to everything else, that they get a little bit of a break and it's just not all work for the entire 4 days that they're there. I did not like the concept of it. I didn't understand telling the fans that regular season 82 games was not good enough. If you tell the fans 82 games isn't good enough, they're going to follow your lead in this. But what has happened is, whether it's the freaky courts or the jerseys or whatever the pomp and circumstance around it is, if you tell people it's an event, people will act like it's an event. And that's what's been behind at least a level of success of the NBA Cup. The problem is what happens when you go back to regular 82 game season basketball. Can you keep your fans juiced? Can you keep your league juiced as opposed to something artificially created, even though it has worked?
Speaking of Las Vegas, I agree it's probably a little bit logistically challenging to get teams in there on 1 or 2 days' notice. But we could be looking at a permanent franchise there rather soon. The NBA has been discussing expansion for several years now. It feels like the front runners are Las Vegas and Seattle, but maybe there's some other markets that could eventually get in there. Adam Silver, the commissioner of the NBA, has repeatedly said that they would look into expansion once the new media rights deal is finalized. That deal is obviously now finalized. Have you heard any commentary around when this might actually happen?
Every time it's been brought up since the media rights deal has been done, Adam Silver has been very coy about it. He said, hey, it's a long process. It's not something that is on the front burner of the league's agenda right now, compared to, like you said, it was before the media rights deal is done, before the new collective bargaining agreement is done. And I think it is something that the NBA will consider a priority. I don't think that they understand or have a distinct timeline on when you want to add two teams, because if you add two teams in the western part of the United States, one team would theoretically, not one existing team, would have to go to the Eastern Conference, and you'd have to be able to balance out 16 and 16 teams in both conferences. I don't think they have a definitive answer on that. I think they have ideas, but I don't think there's a real rush right now, because you have to go through expansion draft, you have to go through expansion fees. And although those teams, those existing teams, want the expansion fees, I don't know if anybody's in a rush to have their rosters stripped down, of having their talent diluted. You also have to remember the league went from a period of unprecedented growth between 1988 and 1995. They went from 24 teams to 30 teams when you added Minnesota and Orlando and Miami, Toronto, Vancouver, and it diluted the talent to some degree. So I think the NBA is looking at that and making sure that they're not moving too fast, because that added to the quality of the game slipping a bit in the mid to late 90s.
It feels like, again, Seattle and Las Vegas have been anointed to these teams without any kind of process at this point. Do you get the sense that that's exactly what's going to happen, or do you think there are still some cities out there that may be a dark horse to grab one of these spots?
I'm sure there are some cities that would love to get a part of the process. I'm sure a city like Louisville would love to get a part of the process, just because they have an NBA ready arena called the KFC Yum Center, I believe it's called. I think what happens is, when Seattle had their team taken away, that was done by a previous commissioner, David Stern, but it was almost like a black mark, because Seattle was such a big NBA market. It was such a basketball hotbed. It went to Oklahoma City, which was a smaller market, but a basketball hotbed that has grown into an NBA brand since, but it has not grown as far as, hey, we know where Oklahoma City is. And Las Vegas has long been thought of as an NBA franchise just because they have Summer League there. So I'm not sure if there's going to be definitively any NBA cities that are, or any cities like maybe Kansas City, but Kansas City had a franchise before, Joe. I think you have to be very careful about dark horses. I think you have to look at some, I won't say bad real estate, but there are some TV markets that aren't necessarily basketball hotbeds right now, like Oklahoma City, Memphis, Sacramento. You want to make sure that you're putting it in good and big TV markets that can draw a lot of eyeballs moving forward.
One other thing is that the NBA obviously signed this new media rights deal, $76 billion. It's a massive deal, but they're bringing on new partners and switching out some of the old partners, right? They lost Warner Brothers and TNT, and they're bringing in Amazon and NBC, splitting up the rights a little bit more. What is your sense on how this is going to be for consumers, right? Fans of the NBA. Is this going to change it all, going to multiple different platforms, including streaming, or you think people will adapt relatively easily?
I think it'll take time for people to adapt. I don't think it happens quickly. I think when you look at Amazon going to the NFL, and as much as people were addicted to the NFL and how easily you can picture going to Amazon now, whether it is through your streaming situation or whatever, the first year or so, it seemed like it was a little bit on the rough side. People were complaining. They were wondering if Amazon had the bandwidth to actually hold it. But it happened over the course of a year where they wound up getting better games and people got used to, Thursday at 8:15, we have a game on Amazon. With the NBA, going back to NBC is a little bit different because there's a sense of nostalgia there. The NBA on NBC was part of the league exploding in the 90s with Michael Jordan and the Dream Team and some of the transcendent stars of that period, some of the new age stars of that period. The NBA moving to Amazon is going to be a little different, but I think that's why the NBA did not mind the NFL going there as a trial balloon, because a lot of your fans are NFL fans. And if they're used to going to see NFL games there, theoretically, they will not have as difficult of a transition going to Amazon. I suspect where the NBA looked at it was most fans or most consumers that are watching television, linear television, if they see NBA advertising when they're watching something other than the NBA, oh yeah, we got the NBA on Sunday night, like Sunday Night Football, or Monday night, like it's going to have. It's a bell in their head compared to else are you watching on TNT that's going to give you a reminder that the NBA on TNT is going to be on Thursday or on Tuesday, where you may have to find it. The NBA going back to the NBA going back to NBC feels something very familiar, and you're feeling like, once again, you're going to be, to your point about Christmas Day being on network TV, returning to network TV on the regular is something that the NBA desperately wanted to do. And being on a big network, a legacy network like NBC, brings a sense of nostalgia and familiarity toward a segment of NBA fans.
I love it. Despite some fan concerns over the last few months, the NBA's new media rights deal feels like they're going to be just fine. Thanks for joining us, Vince.
Hey, thank you.
The clock is winding down here, but we have just enough time for some final buzz. So I want to talk about Unrivaled. Now, for those who haven't seen it, Unrivaled is a new 3-on-3 women's basketball league co-founded by WNBA players Breanna Stewart and Nafessa Collier, which tips off its inaugural season this weekend. Stewart and Collier founded Unrivaled so women's professional basketball players had an option to earn significant money without playing overseas during the WNBA offseason. The league will feature 6 teams with 36 total players, including people like Breanna Stewart, Nafessa Collier, Brittany Griner, Cameron Brink, Angel Reese, Sabrina Ionescu, Aaliyah Boston, and many others. One thing to note here is that Caitlin Clark will not be playing in the league for now. But the inaugural Unrivaled season will be 9 weeks long, including the playoffs. All games will be played at Unrivaled's own facility that they built in Miami, which can hold up to 850 fans. There will be an $8 million salary pool, with players earning an average salary of $222,000, more than the WNBA's max salary of $214,000. Players are also receiving equity in the league as part of its revenue-sharing plan, and there are other ways for them to earn money during the season, like the one-on-one midseason tournament that will provide the winner with $250,000. The league is able to pay these salaries because they signed an exclusive 6-year media rights deal with TNT worth more than $100 million that included 45 primetime games. Unrivaled has also secured sponsorship deals with companies like Yahoo Financial, Under Armour, Sephora, State Farm, Ticketmaster, Miller Lite, Wilson, and others. In total, Unrivaled has raised $35 million from multiple investors, including people like Giannis Antetokounmpo, Mark Lazary, Michael Phelps, Dawn Staley, Juju Watkins, Rip Hamilton, Alex Morgan, and Carmelo Anthony. And with so many new sports leagues popping up over the last few years, it'll be interesting to see if Unrivaled can gain traction, potentially giving players a better option to earn money during the offseason rather than traveling abroad. We're all out of time, so it's officially game over for this week. Thank you so much to Vince and for all of you for joining us. Make sure to tune into Yahoo Finance Sports Reports on Thursdays at 5 p.m. wherever you get your podcast. I'm your host, Joe Pompliano. See you next time.
This content was not intended to be financial advice and should not be used as a substitute for professional financial services.